Hello there guys, my name is MrYorkiesWorld, and in today's video I'm actually going to be running you through my P3D version 4.4 settings and config tweaks. I'm also going to be running you through some other system tweaks that I use. Stuff that I basically find that works well to get the best possible performance, nice and smooth, no stuttering or very little stuttering in P3D 4.4. It's a difficult thing to do, and it varies based on your system, but we're going to take a look anyway. Now, I've made a few settings videos, however this is going to be the very latest one for 2018 into 2019 on what I use in P3D version 4.4 to get things running as smoothly as possible. Now, just for reference, these settings might not necessarily work in your simulator on your system. It all depends on everybody's individual systems and everybody's individual setups. Even if you've got the same hardware, you can still have completely different results. So to begin with, just right off the bat, I'm using the Chill Blast Fusion Nimbus PC, which is inspired by Matt Davies. Now, you can follow the link in the description to find out what other amazing flight sim PCs they've got. I don't think they sell the Fusion Nimbus anymore. I think they've got an updated version of it. It's a fantastic piece of hardware. I've upgraded it a little bit. I'm using the Intel Core 4790K, the i7 4790K, overclocked to 4.6 GHz, and the Nvidia GeForce GTX 1080 Ti, which is not actually overclocked. I have 16 GB of RAM, and I've recently turned off hyperthreading in my system BIOS, which I find personally it makes quite a bit of a difference in terms of smoothness. It really does smooth things out a little bit, so I'd recommend trying that tweak as well if you know how to do it. While you're in there, if you've overclocked before, you should know what hyperthreading is. If not, look it up on Google. Hyperthreading, I've switched it off, and it seems to work a lot better on my system in terms of smoothness than it did when it was enabled. So anyways, that's the introduction. Let's get onto the settings that I use for P3D 4.4. Right, okay, so straight away we're going to go through every single one of these on the left here, apart from the controls. They're down to you, so it doesn't really matter. They don't affect performance in any way. So, application then. So, I've got prompt on exit. That's obviously ticked. I don't pause things on task switch because I use a separate screen for stuff like EFB and things like that. So I prefer to be able to switch between screens without having to pause the sim every 5 minutes. If you just want to have a look at these settings and then just copy them, that's perfectly fine, or take them down in any way that you want. We can go to information. I don't have vehicle labels showing. I don't have primary text or primary info text. The only miscellaneous text that I've got is message text. And that's because I prefer a nice little bit of realism. I don't want random bits of text popping up when I'm hovering over things in the cockpit. But there we go. Sound. Again, this is entirely up to you. I have voice near enough switched off all the way down to 0 because I don't use it. I use Pro ATCX and things like that. So and it all does it for me. So it's not involved with the sim in any way in terms of like how loud it is and stuff with the voice. I turn it off. If you have that switched on when you've got Pro ATCX on, what will happen is you'll hear the default ATC coming from the sim, and you'll hear Pro ATCX at the same time. Very, very annoying. Obviously, mute on lost focus. This depends on the aircraft. PMDG tend to have issues where the sound will still mute when you go onto a second screen. Apart from the 777, it's a bit annoying, but I just have it switched off anyway. Traffic, again, Ultimate Traffic Live takes care of all this, so I can turn all the default options in the sim down to 0, because it's all done by Pro ATCX. Realism, these are my realism settings. Ignore crashes and damage because I'm absolutely sick to death of AI aircraft randomly spawning on top of me or something like that and causing me to have to redo the entire flight. So that's why I've got that switch to ignore crashes and damage. Apart from that, if you want to take these settings down, you're perfectly welcome to do so. It's nothing special. I think yours will be near enough exactly the same, to be honest. So moving on to the display settings now, and I've got two profiles that are set up. I've got high scenery and I've got regular settings. Now, I'm going to be updated. The only difference, the reason it says custom is because I've changed this from 4 times SSAA, and on the regular settings, it's set to something else, or either that or something else is set differently. But we'll go from my regular settings first. This is where you don't really have much scenery involved. There's not really much reason to turn anything down. So FXAA, obviously that's switched off. Texture filtering is 16 times. Texture resolution 2048 by 2048, and anti-aliasing is set to 4 times SSAA. I am not blacking out the desktop, but I am choosing autofill the main window, and the reason I don't black out the desktop is because I use 2 screens. VSync is switched on with triple buffering with an unlimited target frame rate, and I do have MIPMAP virtual cockpit panels. That's very important, unless you want very low quality panels. So I have that selected. If we go over to the world settings now, you can see the terrain. I've got level of detail radius to ultra. Tessellation factor is high. Mesh resolution is 2 meters. Texture resolution is 15 centimeters, and I don't use the high resolution terrain textures. The reason for that is because these, to be honest, I don't really recognize much of a difference whatsoever between it being enabled and disabled. I use FTX Global and FTX England and stuff like that, and I don't notice any difference whatsoever. But for some reason, when it's ticked, it causes a little bit of a drop in FPS and performance and smoothness and things like that. Water detail is set to medium. I've got bathymetry enabled. The only reflections that I've got actually active are user vehicle. Some people have clouds, some people have buildings and stuff like that. I literally just use user vehicle. Now the scenery, this is where things get a little bit complicated because these can affect your performance quite a bit. So scenery complexity is set to dense. Remember, this is the regular settings I use when I'm not using sort of heavy sceneries and stuff like that. So dense on the scenery complexity. Autogen and scenery draw distance is set to high. The vegetation density is sparse because I really don't care about trees. And autogen building density is set to normal. Now, I don't have dynamic 3D autogen vegetation switched on. For me, it causes some weirdly coloured trees and it just doesn't look right. So I have it switched off. It also causes a bit of a performance impact as well. So that's why I've got it switched off. Special effects, both of those are set to medium. I'm really not bothered about special effects. I just care about flying the aircraft. Lighting, I've got enable HDR lighting, obviously. Brightness, this is my brightness, is 1.00. My bloom is 0.05. And my saturation is 1.00. I've got the dynamic reflection set to high. I do use tomato shade, so I like to see those nice reflections. I've got dynamic lighting. Landing lights illuminate the ground, and I've disabled lens flare because sometimes that can have an impact on performance as well, I've noticed. Specifically when you're panning around and you see the sun up in the sky and you've got those effects enabled. It looks fantastic, but unfortunately it does affect FPS and smoothness and stuff, and it causes some stuttering when you're looking at the sun. So I've switched it off temporarily. Shadow quality is set to medium with the draw distance set to high. And if you want to take down the casting and receiving settings here that I've got for shadows, you feel free to do that. Casting, I've got internal vehicle and external vehicle and clouds. Receiving, I've got internal vehicle, external vehicle, and buildings. That's all I use. I don't use any extra settings. Now, if we finally go over to weather, we've got the cloud draw distance set to 90 miles, and the cloud coverage density is set to high. Now, we've got detailed clouds, volumetric fog, detailed precipitation, and windshield effects. No thermal visualization. This really is down to Active Sky. If you use Active Sky, you can play around with these settings in the sim, and you can also play around with the settings inside of Active Sky as well to try and get the perfect balance of sort of performance versus visuals. For me, I'm not really bothered, to be honest. I just stick with standard clouds that I use with Active Sky cloud art and things like that, and Rex and a mixture of everything. So I'm not too bothered about how realistic they look, to be honest. I'm bothered about, again, flying the aircraft. Enable turbulence and thermal effects on the vehicle. Obviously, that's going to be ticked. And apart from that, that is everything that is in terms of my slider settings in the sim. So we've been through application, information, sound, traffic, realism, display, world, lighting, and weather. That is my regular setup. Now, if I'm using high scenery, this time, straight away, you can see FXAA is still off. I've got anti-aliasing set to 2 times instead of 4 times. Everything else is near enough the same. In fact, it is the same on this page, apart from the anti-aliasing. World. So we've got the level of detail radius as only high instead of ultra. We've got a tessellation factor of medium. The mesh resolution and texture resolution are still the same. and I still have use high resolution terrain textures switched off. Scenery complexity, we move down now to normal. The autogen scenery and draw distance is set to high, and both the vegetation and the building density are set to sparse. I don't really see much of a difference, to be honest. It's still quite a lot of buildings that you get with sparse, so it's not really a major issue in terms of visuals. Again, dynamic 3D autogen is unticked. Special effects is still on medium, and the water detail is medium. I don't have bathymetry enabled when I'm using the high scenery setting, and the reflections are still the same, which is just user vehicle. Moving on to lighting, the same lighting settings basically, apart from the fact that I've got dynamic lighting disabled and lens flare enabled. Don't ask me why I've enabled that when I spoke about it being terrible before. But anyways, it is enabled. Dynamic lighting does take frames up, so that's disabled. The reflections are only medium, and the shadow quality is low, and the draw distance is high. The shadows are exactly the same, casting and receiving. That's exactly the same as the regular settings. Moving on to weather, this is basically the same as well. Everything is the same as the regular settings, so high and 90 miles. That is basically my two setups that I use, my two profiles, so high scenery and regular settings. If you want to take those down, again, it might not mean like night and day, a difference between night and day and stuff like that in your sim. You might still have to tweak things, which is why I have entered these two into my config file. As of the 12th of the 12th, 2018, or the 12th of December 2018, these are the two, as well as these settings, these are the two tweaks that I've got. Only these, nothing else. So I've got, under the main section, we've got fiber frame time fraction 0.01. And we've got, under the terrain section, we've got texture size EXP set to 8. Again, these two settings, depending on what other tweaks you've got, I would recommend, if you're going to mess around with your config file, I would recommend making a backup of the original first, and making a backup of your personal version of it first, before you start putting this in. And if you're going to start tweaking this and following my video, what I would do is allow the sim to build a new one first, and then put these settings in, just to make sure that none of your previous settings clash with what you've got in you know, what you put in and stuff like that. You will find in the description links to my add-on spreadsheet as well as my P3D config file. I wouldn't recommend just copying and pasting that config file into your directory, because again, your system is more than likely completely different to mine, whether that be hardware, software, equipment, or all three. It's probably going to be different, so you can actually mess things up a little bit if you go around playing with your config file and just copying and pasting things. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is it. So that is the video for 2018, for December 2018, on my P3D version 4.4 settings and config tweaks and things like that. I've also made you aware of my hardware as well. All of it is in the description if you didn't catch it. Everything you need to know is in the description. I get a lot of questions from people asking me, what do you do for this? What do you do for that? Everything is in the description of each and every single one of my videos. It's easily accessible. You can download my profiles, my content. So thanks for watching, guys. That is the December 12th, 2018 MrYorkiesWorld config and settings video, whatever you want to call it. I've done about 25 of these videos, but I'm hoping that this is going to be the one that I stick with for the next however long. So thanks for watching, guys. If you liked it, leave me a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.